Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is so much fun. I've known Shira SJ Rozan for the entirety of her career, and we're really pleased that she has once again presented us with a Lydia Chin and Bill Smith, almost did it backwards, mystery. And happily in family business, not only are we in New York City, Chinatown, but you remember the wonderful Bill Smith where he was a bricklayer? I mean, we're in the construction industry. Yeah, all right. I absolutely love that book. And so we're now back into sort of not bricklaying, but anyway, the New York development and construction universe, which is like and yet unlike any other. But for those of you who don't know it, Shira is an architect by training. And so this is really her wheelhouse that she's going to write about. So how much fun. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. It's getting cold here in New York, and things are looking up. We had this new virus, new strain of the virus, but it seems to be, handleable. And we're I've been to the theater, I've been to the opera. It's kind of amazing, that everything is clicking back into place. Yeah.
Well, it hasn't actually made dramatic changes in Phoenix like it has in New York. So depending on your circumstances and your employment, where you live and all the rest of it, life has in many ways not been terribly interrupted. I remember how terrified we all were in the first year. And now I think that we have become resigned and careful, but maybe we're not nearly as scared as we.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
So, hopefully, we'll see. I feel lucky of had the Pfizer and the booster shot. And so, that's what they're now recommending to detail. I think one of the interesting things about Omicron is how to pronounce it. There was a whole article in either the Journal or the Times about the Greeks say it one way and everybody else saying it another way. And so
right.
As they're working their way through the Greek alphabet, they're running into linguistic issues that are really interesting. But anyway, here we have Lydia and Bill. Now, I am sad to say that Paper Son, which was the last book, which I loved, I have not been able to find a paperback edition of it.
He says the publisher says it's now available POD. But I know I haven't tried to get it, but that's what it's.
I will take another look, but I haven't been lucky enough. But let me check on it, because Paper Son took place in Mississippi. And for those of you who didn't watch our discussion when Paper Son came out last year, I recommend that you go through our Facebook videos. When did we talk about it last year?
That's actually 2 years ago, because there was the Art of Violence in between.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Well, when do you remember what time of year we talked about Paper Son?
It was I think earlier than this. It was a fall book, I think. So it must have been fall 2019.
Okay. Well, and anyway, you can scroll back through it. And I really recommend that you do. It's a fascinating book about Chinese community in Mississippi, which was something I was completely surprised by. And Paper Son, actually, you might want to tell them why you called the book and what a Paper Son is.
A Paper Son it's a phrase known to the Chinese American community. In 1882, there was a law passed by the Congress that stopped cold Chinese immigration into the country, but it did not stop the immigration of the children of citizens. So a Chinese man who had been naturalized before that could bring his children to America, children born in China, because these men would go home and they had wives there and there were children born there. And a Paper Son was a son born probably to somebody else in China, and men would sell their information, the names of their villages and the names of their family and everything you needed to know to claim to be the son of this American citizen. And then you would come over here and you would get interviewed at Angel Island. And if you passed your interview and they believed that you were the son of this guy, you got to stay. And so entire family names were changed as people came over as paper sons, and then kept the name of the man whose papers they bought because they had to. You
Right.
couldn't now say, well, I came over as a Lin, but actually I'm a Chow, so I'm going to be a Chow from now on, because they'd send you back. So that's what a paper son is. It's a son on paper.
And apparently, at least in Shura's book, there they were in Mississippi, with a really fascinating interplay between the Black community and the Chinese community, the Jewish community. I never really thought of Mississippi as a kind of melting pot, but it turns out that it was.
Yeah, the Delta especially, it was, which is really interesting because, right, when we were young, we learned about Mississippi as a story of black and white.
Mhm.
And it really isn't. There were Jews, there were Italians, there were Native Americans, there were Lebanese, besides the Chinese. And it really was much more of a diverse population than we were taught as kids.
Absolutely. And I think one of the great things about your novel, Shura, is that you have always been able to give us history and senses of different communities and so forth while crafting your really brilliant and, in fact, Edgar-winning mysteries.
Thank you.
Yay. Remind me, are you a winner of the Nero Wolf Award? They just announced it. I thought you were.
Yeah, not this one, but
no, I understand.
Yeah, for Winter and Night.
Right. And okay. And so the Nero Wolf Award is for novels that are in the tradition of Rex Stout's Nero Wolf novels. And I like that, that yours, in fact, we're talking to the new Nero Wolf winner at 6:30 tonight after we talk to Shura. His name is Stephen Spotswood. And I'm pleased. And I have a list, which I'll put in our e-news for those of you who get it, of the past winners. There's a link to, and it's a really interesting and diverse group of authors. It includes Dana Stabenow, who's currently out in my kitchen, and you,
Hi,
and Lee
Dana.
Child, and Dana Slahane, and authors that you might not, Louise Penny, that you might not necessarily think of as writing. So, what do you understand, before we move into family, but what do you understand of a mystery in the tradition of Rex Stout and Nero Wolf would be? Sure.
Well, I think, and it's a tradition I try to work in, not in the softness of those books, but it is a fair play tradition. You have to give the reader everything they need to solve the case. You can't sneak something in at the end. You can't have the protagonist know something that the reader doesn't know. And then if you manage to do that thing where, don't look at this hand, look at that hand. And then you when the reader gets to the solution, you want the reader to say, why didn't I figure that out? That, I think, is what the Nero Wolf Award really is rewarding.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the only way when you're writing a real mystery, not a wider crime novel, but
Right.
a mystery. It's the only reasonable way to do it, I think.
Well, I was crazy about the Nero Wolf stories, and I think many of us older readers anyway probably read our way through Rex Stout. I'm old enough to have done it in real time practically, so there we are. But yeah, it is fair play, and the plots are always clever, but characters are important too. And it's because thrillers can have such a broad landscape. If you're writing that kind of a book, normally the landscape of the book where the action all takes place is relatively circumscribed. You can't be flitting around from Hong Kong to, although you've done that in your books, but generally when you've gone to, some other place, you stay there.
Yeah. The Hong Kong book takes place in Hong Kong.
In Hong Kong, exactly. Yeah. Or the Mississippi book, you're in Mississippi.
In Mississippi.
Right. And so it's hard to write that kind of a story if you're moving your characters across a really broad landscape, which is more characteristic of a thriller. Which leads me to family business. I forgot to say that Shura has very kindly autographed copies for us, as she has done for all of her books. And and it's a wonderful gift idea, wonderful present for you. Has a really nice cover. You can probably see that there's a, what is it, a dragon? It's dragon,
Yeah,
isn't
it's a
it?
Chinese dragon. It's one of the imperial dragons,
Right,
and it's superimposed over buildings of Chinatown.
exactly. So talking about community, we are in this book to some degree, we are within the community of the Tongs. So for
Yeah.
those who don't know what a Chinese Tong is, perhaps we should begin by you explaining that.
Chinese Tongs started out as mutual protection associations, but soon devolved into organized crime. That is, if you're protecting your fellow merchants from criminal activity, you could make a little more money by being the criminal activity and offering to not burn their store down if they pay you. And so that is sort of what happened. They started out as ways to protect each other in China, ways to protect each other from foreigners, from the British and the French and all those people who were rampaging through China in the late 1800s. But by the time they came here, certainly, and by the time they got to Hong Kong, the Tongs were more or less the Chinese mafia, different families, different groups, and they operate. They're much weaker now than they used to be, but they're not gone, and they operate in similar fashion to the non-existent Italian mafia that the Italians always tell you doesn't exist, but whatever it is, they operate. They have particular ranks and particular jobs that people have. There are a whole bunch of foot soldiers, and they in Chinatown, each of the Tongs would have a building, a place of their own, and they would operate out of that. They would have territory. There would be, you paid your protection money to this guy or to this Tong or that Tong or the other one. And as long as everybody behaved, there wouldn't be much in the way of violence. But that was always a possibility. And the Tong Wars of the late 1800s, early 1900s in Chinatown are still famous, and people still think that goes on. It doesn't, but that was the process of establishing territory, who had what blocks and so on. The Tongs are now involved in more white collar crime, certainly drug dealing, money laundering, all that kind of stuff. They also still run numbers and gambling parlors, prostitution, all of that street crime. They still are involved in. So that was the world I started from.
So, I mean, basically, they're operating a business, although much of their supply side and so forth is illegal. Some of it is legal. And one of the things I find interesting about Tongs is that there are wonderful names for positions that people have in the Tongs. And I learned this from my friend Ian Hamilton, a Canadian writer who has a fabulous series with a forensic accountant. She starts out as a forensic accountant from Toronto, who family, a second wife, her mother was the second wife and came from China, from Hong Kong to Toronto. So she's been brought up there, but she has family in Hong Kong. But she's very close to and becomes allied in business with a leader of a Hong Kong Tong. Last name.
Right.
And anyway, so from that I learned about red poles and white paper fans and all of that, and you use them in the book. So yeah. Did you already know that, or do you?
I knew it, although I had to do a little research to make sure I knew which one was which. I knew there were red poles and white paper fans. There's a straw sandal. There are various, but I didn't want to get it wrong. Who was who?
Right.
But it was not hard to research.
No, but why are they called that? I mean, I think it's fascinating. What is a red pole, and why would he be called a red pole?
I couldn't tell you, although the red pole is the enforcer, so it kind of makes sense. he might have a red pole and go around whacking people with it
Right.
in the early days. The white paper fan, I don't know. The straw sandal, I also don't know. It must, I think, be a homophone in Mandarin, or maybe in Cantonese, because so much of this comes from Hong Kong. But the Chinese language has so many words that you don't use in certain situations because they sound like other words.
Okay.
So the number 4 is unlucky because it sounds like death. You don't give a clock as a gift, because to give a clock sounds like to say goodbye to somebody on his deathbed. So it's bad luck to give a clock or a watch. So I would assume that these names are homophones for something else. So white paper fan may be advisor, something like that.
Right.
But I don't know the actual reasons. And
Well,
that I
believe
could
that,
not find out.
because since you use them in the book, it might throw people that are not, familiar with this, and people are referred to as not by their name necessarily, but, in Tong X, white paper fan, and he has a specific job, a specific role. Are a lot of these hereditary, Cher?
No. It is hereditary to be in the Tong. If your father was in the Tong, you're raised to come into the Tong if you're a man. I suppose you don't have to, although it would kind of behoove you then to go to some other place. But the jobs are not hereditary. The jobs are assigned by the head of the Tong to whomever he thinks will do it best.
So there can be a lot of rivalry, internecine rivalry, all kinds of
There
things.
absolutely there can.
And when the head of the Tong were coming up, the reason I'm going through all this is that's where this book starts, with the death of Big Brother Choi, who is the head of the Tong. But it heralds in a lot of potential change, a lot of rivalries, or jockeying for positions, whatever. So I love Big Brother Choi. That's such a great name. So basically he dies. And that's what the book starts out. Now, is he a murder victim, or does he just die?
No, Big Brother Choi just dies. And I tried to make that clear because that would get too complicated. But it's his death that starts all the balls rolling, because he is, as it turns out, and I don't think I'm giving much away if I say this, but as it turns out, the Tong not only occupies this building, but he turns out to have owned it, which nobody knew. And that building is the Tong Building is the holdout building in a development on a corner in Chinatown that a Chinese American real estate developer is trying to put together. And Choi leaves the building to his niece. The Tong expected to either inherit the building if he owned it, or be able to stay in it if they were renting it, which had always been the case. They had rented it for 100 years. He bought it and didn't tell anybody except his financial advisor. And so the question now is, does the niece keep it? Does she let the Tong stay? Does she sell it to the Tong? But the Tong is in two branches at that point. They're of two minds on whether they want to keep it, and if they do want to keep it, what they're going to do with it. And she's caught in the middle, and Lydia and Bill she's the client, so they're sort of caught with her. So that's the setup. That folks is just the setup.
So why, obviously Lydia and Bill are private investigators. They're not cops. This isn't a thriller hero series where Jack Reacher is strolling through Chinatown and somebody drops in front of him and immediately he springs into action, which is actually the way one of the Jack Reachers starts, except it's not in Chinatown, but he's walking by a dry cleaner and somebody, comes out of the building and that gets it all going. So Bill and Lydia actually need to have a client in order to continue their business and so forth. And in that tradition of private eye, their loyalty really is to their client.
Yeah.
You know, they're, I mean, they're not, it's a very specific kind of a loyalty. You know, they're there representing their client. And what, why does the niece come to them? Why does she pick them?
The niece is she's an attorney,
Right.
and she's a real estate attorney on the tenant side, and she wants to inspect the building as soon as she finds out it has been left to her, and she wants to see what's in there and what it's like. She's been there before as a kid growing up, but she wants to go in. But now that she owns it and Big Brother Choi is dead, she goes to another Tong, a man high up in the Tong, from a different Tong. This is Grandfather Gao, who is an old family friend of Lydia's family. He's the one who sent Lydia and Bill to Hong Kong,
Right.
in Reflecting the Sky. He's been in and out of some of the books and some of the short stories. She goes to him because her uncle, Big Brother Choi, had always told her, if I'm not around and you need something, you can trust Grandfather Gao, even though we're enemies, because he's an honorable man. So she goes to him and says, do you think it's okay if I go into the building alone, given the circumstances? And he says, no, I would not do that. But he says, I know whom you can call to go with you. So they call Lydia and Bill, and they come down and hear the situation, and they go the next day with her. They take her on as a client and go with her to the building. She also wants them to go to Big Brother Choi's funeral before they go to the building, to sort of establish their presence and to establish her as someone who has protection just in case she needs it. So that's how they get involved.
Right. And I mean, there's a lot of money at stake in this, and there's a lot of emotion at stake in this.
Yeah.
You know, development has roiled New York forever, as far as I could work out. But anytime you're going to disrupt a well-established neighborhood or something people count on, you know, the people in Big Brother Choi's Tong, you know, this is their home, basically, their building home anyway, their office. And what happened if it's sold and knocked down and displaced by housing? Is that, remind me, what is it that the guy wants to put there? Is it housing?
He wants to put a mixed use development, housing above and commercial and community spaces on the first 2 floors. But so the Tong would be displaced. Yes, they would not get any of the community space. That would not, you know, other organizations would. But the problem, so that's the Tong's issue,
Right.
Whether they want the building sold, since they won't get any of this money. You know, now, because it's not their building as they thought it was. But the further problem is this development is so big that it would effectively destroy Chinatown, not on its own, not in a minute, but it would change the character of that corner to such an extent, and it would bring in the yuppies. It would bring in the new Google hires, because Google has a big presence here in New York, and all those kinds of people. And they would not be Chinatown people. And the pressure from them would extend out. Other stores would close, buildings would be sold. It really would be the demise of Chinatown. So there's a huge anti this developer sentiment anyway in Chinatown when the book starts up and when Choi dies, because Choi had been holding out. All the other buildings that he needs to do this development have signed agreements that if he gets all the buildings by a certain amount of time, by the end of the year, they will all sell. If he doesn't get all the buildings, then they can choose not to sell. So there's a lot of pressure on him to scoop up this last building. And there's a lot of pressure on the now owner, on the client, not to sell it. There's pressure to sell it. She doesn't really know what she should do and what the right thing is. And that's where we start. The interesting thing about Chinatown, as opposed to other areas that are ripe for development in New York, is that there are natural ebbs and flows in the life of a community. And Little Italy, for example, is completely gone, except for the restaurants, which are now in Chinese-owned buildings, because the Italian immigrants who came in the mid-19th century all went on to, their kids went on to become middle class, and their kids went on to become college educated and beyond that. Nobody wanted to live in those tenements anymore, and they moved out. The Jewish Lower East Side, the same thing. The Chinese are still coming. Those other immigrants aren't coming anymore, but the Chinatown has not outlived its immigrants yet. In fact, there are now 6 or 7 Chinatowns, depending on how you count them, in 3 boroughs, in Queens and Brooklyn and in Manhattan. And if there doesn't develop one in the Bronx soon, I will be surprised, because the Chinese coming from different places are kind of making little Chinatowns all over. But the main Chinatown in Manhattan is still getting new residents, and it isn't naturally its time, as it were. But, and this is something I found out when I was doing the book, there is nothing in Chinatown that is landmarked. The only thing that's keeping developers from tearing the whole place down is zoning. And zoning can be fairly easily changed or gotten around, or the thin edge of the wedge can be, one building and then there are other buildings and so on. And so this could happen to Chinatown. And it's the location, its physical location, geographical location adds more pressure, because it's down right near Wall Street, right near everything downtown. It's got transportation all around. There's a set of low-income projects way over east, but not in the middle. And it's really ripe for all kinds of real estate shenanigans. And when I learned that, I thought I would work with it. I would point that out, because I don't like to tell my readers what to think, but I do like to let them know what I think. And the idea of Chinatown vanishing gives me a real stomachache. So, if it helps anything in the anti-development of Chinatown world to have this book, I would be happy about it.
Well, gentrification has really been a dreadful thing for many, many people. And in fact, I think it's given rise to much of the resentments that brought us the election in 2016. I mean, you can look at places like Aspen, Colorado, for a long time, Santa Fe, where basically gentrification comes in and people can't afford to live in their own community.
Yeah.
They can't,
Yeah.
you know, if they're in a lower income bracket or so forth, they don't make enough money to deal with the rising real estate. I mean, this is a huge problem in Idaho. There was a big article in, I think it was the Times, might have been the Journal, but I think it was the Times, not long ago about not Sun Valley per se, but right around it. Might have been, I don't remember if it was Boise or Haley or whatever it was. But anyway, because of the pandemic, so many people have moved out to more remote areas and so forth. And the housing is also true in Montana, where it's become apparently people who live in places like Billings can't afford to live there anymore. And the cost of real estate has doubled, tripled, quadrupled due to demand. And so what happens to the core community when all of these incomers with much more money show up? And that's been particularly true. It would be true the other way in New York, but many people in California whose properties were so highly valued sold out and moved to these more, and so they had pots of money compared to the people who were living there in order to, you know, to buy it. One of the other big questions that came up in something I was recently reading is, I'm trying to remember if it's in Wyoming, where it is. Anyway, some billionaire has come in and bought umpteen acres, and he's putting up like a 20-some thousand foot home, and then another lodge, and then, you know, a whole swimming facility, and, you know, riding stables and all. And basically he's creating what we think of as the British country mansion, you know, British country estate, with this enormous amount of land holding. Well, what does that mean for the other people who live in this area who can't compete with him? I mean, in Connecticut, we have seen examples of one billionaire taking on another over property lines, you know, and so forth. There was some really horrible fights in places like Connecticut, but these are people who are sort of equally armed for the fight, because they both have money, and then it's just a matter of whose lawyer is better, or which one is more tenacious, or one of them dies or whatever. But people who are relatively poor don't have any defense against a millionaire, billionaire who shows up and, you know, buys something. But then you've got the individual's right to sell. So Mel,
and that's what the situation in Chinatown.
So she has the right to sell this building and take the money, and it becomes then the last holdout in this gigantic project. And so the Tong members themselves who thought the building was theirs aren't going to benefit from that. So
they're not going to benefit from it straight up legally, but there is some question as to if she does do this and get millions and millions of dollars, how seriously will they make an attempt to extort some of it from her?
No, that's another whole question. What we haven't did, you referred to him as he, but we haven't really talked about that. Every book really needs a villain of a sort, you know, whether it's an actual villain or sort of a, you know, pro forma villain or whatever. Who is the developer? Because he too is Chinese.
He is Chinese American. There's more than one villain in this book because people want different things and they're operating at cross purposes. But the developer is Chinese American, and he is in a position. He was not raised in Chinatown. He was raised in Flushing, which is one of the other Chinatowns, but in a middle-class family. And his father was a building owner. He was a landlord of a number of buildings, and also a developer on a small scale. And when the young man inherited the business, he started working on a larger scale. And this development will be his entree, if he can get it built, into the big mega world of New York developers, up there with the Macklows and you should pardon the expression, the Trumps and the Helmsleys, and, you know, up in that world. And he's young to do that, and this is a very ambitious project, and that's what he wants to do. And so that's his motivation. He's not Chinese in the same way as they are, but he is, I mean, as the people in Chinatown, he's not an immigrant, but he is Chinese American, and he knows he knows how to maneuver in that world. But the Tong guys, in their various ways, are also bad guys, and working at cross purposes with him, working at for the same goal as he has. There's a lot of people working to do a lot of things in this book that it confused me. I have to say, it got very complicated.
Yeah, no, it really is. I mean, there's so many players and so many motivations and so forth, and so many goals here that you do have to pay attention when you're reading it. I think it's also important to recognize that New York has very specific geographical boundaries. Manhattan, it's an island. And I mean, here in Phoenix, if we have a developer, they can just build out towards California. I mean, one day we're either going to be like amalgamated with Tucson going south, or, we've got like 390th Avenue. You could be halfway to, Palm Springs or something and still be in Phoenix. Phoenix is actually now the largest city geographically. It's not the largest in population, but there's no physical limit on a couple of sides of the city. But in New York, there's only so much.
And that's true of all 5 boroughs.
Right.
Manhattan is an island. Staten is an island.
Right.
Brooklyn bangs right up into Queens, and Queens bangs right up into non-New York City towns on Long Island, and the Bronx bangs right up into Westchester.
Yep.
So there is no place to go.
No.
And that's true of the neighborhoods also.
Right.
Chinatown subsumed Little Italy and the Lower East Side, but meanwhile, the gentrified Lower East Side is coming down now into Chinatown. Before the pandemic, there was a nightclub, for a gentrified nightclub for the nightclub people, that opened on one of the most historic streets in Chinatown, opened in a basement. It had nothing to do with Chinatown. It had nothing to do with anything except it was a great spot for a nightclub, they thought, so they opened it. And that looked like a cultural thin edge of the wedge, not a physical built one, because it didn't change the physical structure. But to have that nightclub there, it looked like in the beginning of some kind of end. It has since closed. The pandemic closed it, but that doesn't mean that kind of thing won't be back.
Well, I brought it up because the stakes are high, and you could say, well, big deal. Why can't he just do his development somewhere else? And the answer is he really can't, because there isn't anywhere else.
Yeah. The thing about Chinatown is that it would be possible to buy a series of buildings the way he has. In other places, those buildings are probably already owned and built to their zoning maximum. One of the things he wants to do, I didn't really go into this in the book, but there's a thing in New York about selling air rights.
Yep.
So that if you, and the zoning can be rearranged so that if you make street level buildings and then go up, you can buy the air rights from around. So you can go up. Now, then that lot won't ever be able to go up. But meanwhile, there you are at 20 stories. And 20 stories in Chinatown is basically 3 times the height of anything else. And if it's a big, massive building at 20 stories, it's a real problem. And that's what he wants to do. And and he wants to do it there to show that he can. That's one of the reasons. And,
right. Well, I mean, it's sort of the opposite of, like in Texas, where you can own property, but you don't own the mineral rights. You don't own the oil underneath it and so forth. So you've got you've got the land itself, and then you've got air rights, and then you can also have subterranean rights. And now real estate is really complicated
Yeah.
depending on, where you are and where the value lies. But anyway, you can imagine from this somewhat complicated discussion that this book has to explore all these, different players and their different stakes and whatever. And here in the middle of it is this lawyer, the niece of Big Brother Joy, who really didn't expect to inherit this building and doesn't have any clear-cut path about what it is she's supposed to do. But there's also this really cool part. We can't tell you how it works out. There's a treasure hunt in this book, which is really fun. So it's even better than it's a murder mystery with a treasure hunt. And
Right.
There is a surprise ending, which we're not going to discuss, but it's a lot of fun to get there. And so I thought it was really an inspired plot. Shira, you must have spent a lot of time on it. Does your architectural training help you do stuff like this? Do you see things in, the way, in your writing, the way you might approach them as an architect?
That's an interesting question, in a sense, because as an architect, you get I'm going to say you get a vision. I don't mean you get a vision, but you have an overall concept and you work into it. Okay, if this is going to happen, then these things have to happen. And if those things happen, then to make them happen, and it's almost working backwards, not really, but almost. So you get to a point and you think, oh, and I do this in my book, I think, okay, if that is what happened, what made it happen? What could have happened to put these people in this position? Well, it has to be this. And that means that this and this also, so that I don't get too worried. I get a little worried, but not too worried when I am in a position where I don't know what is going to develop from it, because that is a classic architectural situation where you have you're looking at something and you have a problem. You have this and this going on, but you don't know what else needs to go on or how you can solve this issue if you also want to do that. And it's similar in books. And I remember years ago, one of the greatest things ever, a guy I knew, I was complaining about a client who wanted something. And I said, there's no possible way to do that. And he said, no, there's always a way. You just have to find it. And it's true. Sometimes the way is so costly that you tell the client, yeah, we can do it. It'll cost you an extra $16 million. And the client says, well, in that case, let's forget it. But there is always a way. And it's true in writing also, there's always a way. Sometimes the way might involve the Martians landing, in which case you might not want to do it because you're not writing that kind of book, but there will be a way. And so I'm always looking for that way, that I've gotten to this and this point. And the question now is, how did that happen and what happens from here that makes sense with what's already happened? And I have occasionally realized that the thing that happens now and makes sense with what's already here requires a whole bunch of changes earlier on if I'm going to make it clear. I'm working on a book now in which I realized very close to the end that the young woman had a fiance and has had this fiance from the beginning. He doesn't need to come in, but he needs to be mentioned very early on, and then again in the middle. And so that when we get to where he's important, he's been there. And I didn't know about this guy until I got close to the end. That happens. And I think what my architectural training does is it stops me from panicking when that happens. It stops me from saying, no, there's no fiance. There was never a fiance. Where did he come from? I said, okay, there's a fiance. I got to go back and make him make sense with the rest of the book. And I think that the complexities of what I'm building here don't throw me the way they might if I hadn't had a lot of experience on physical objects.
I think that's true. I
Building.
mean, I always think of your books as structures, and you know, in creating a structure, you have to solve problems. And so, you
Yeah,
know, I think all of your books really reflect that. It's one reason I enjoy them so much. But the other thing we haven't talked about, because we've been talking about money and all this other stuff, is we haven't talked about relationships. And you can imagine that this book is driven by the characters and the relationships. But Bill and Lydia have evolved over time,
yeah,
from what were really, you know, kind of, I don't want to say disinterested, but just partners and all. They've evolved into a more personal relationship. And that means that Lydia's mother, who does not approve of Bill because he's not Chinese, among other things, Lydia's mother has played a significant role. But in this book, when you call it family business, you're not just talking about the Tong family, Big Brother Choi and his family, but Lydia's family, particularly one of her brothers, her least favorite brother.
yeah.
Um, Lydia's family plays a really big role in this book. And I love the way that Bill and Lydia's mother are kind of, you know, if they're not happy with each other, at least they've sort of moved past open warfare. And
Yeah, they sort of have to. Bill is happy to move past open warfare
right,
with her into a truce. She had to kind of convince herself that Lydia was not going to give up this private investigator nonsense. She was not going to give up Bill. And Lydia's mother just has to learn to live with it. So she is trying to make an effort to accept Bill as a human being. Partly, I mean, that was what happened in Paper Son, is
right.
she sent him to Mississippi with Lydia, because, basically because she couldn't go herself, and somebody had to take care of Lydia, and she knew he would try. And so she's of that same opinion about him in this book, that he may be a lot of things she objects to, but he does take good care of Lydia
Right.
when he needs
Well,
to.
and Lydia's brothers are married and so forth. And, you know, so, I mean, it's a very Chinese thing about marriage and children and the whole bit,
Yeah,
aside from the
yeah,
one
Two-
child rule in China, which they've now regretted. But
yeah.
so Lydia's the outlier, so to speak,
Yeah,
in her
Lydia
family.
and one of her, well, two of the brothers are married with
Right,
children. One of the brothers is gay and about to be married to his
right,
husband, his gay husband, and that leaves Lydia and Tim, her least favorite brother, who are both single. And that gets Lydia's mother all anxious that they won't have anybody, that in Tim's case, that he won't be discovered to be the gem that he is by some worthwhile woman. Lydia, of course, doesn't think Tim is much of a gem at all. But in Lydia's case, her mother is worried that she won't find anybody to take care of her, and she will be alone, which, when Lydia's mother was young and growing up in China, that was a dangerous thing for a woman to be.
yeah,
And you would marry anybody in order to have the safety of a home. And that is not the case anymore in Lydia's world, but her
right.
mother doesn't see it that way.
Well, I
So
really enjoyed the family dynamics in this book. I mean, Tim is
thank you.
a difficult relationship for Lydia. But I also like the fact that Lydia, and there was something else that came along recently about living separate and apart, that there are many marriages now that are not, you know, the normal two people and children, if they're already occupying the same residence and whatever it is, but people are actually choosing to live in different apartments in the same building,
Yeah.
or in different locations. A lot of these are remarriages where each partner might have, you know, children and custody arrangements and or different jobs and whatever. And so they commit to being married, but they don't actually live together. So separate and apart. And that's basically what's going on with Lydia and Bill, because Lydia is still living with her mother,
Right.
but Bill has his own place over there. So sometimes they get to have overnights and sometimes they don't. And,
Yeah.
you know, maybe that's maybe that's a good way for them to live, you know,
Yeah,
not being judgmental.
it certainly works now because that is Lydia's arrangement with her brothers, that they pay the rent, but she lives there and, you know,
Looks
does the
after their mother.
shopping and whatever needs to be done. Although her mother thinks she's looking after Lydia.
Right.
And Bill's been living alone for a million years.
Yeah.
He has the piano, which he doesn't even let Lydia hear him play. He has his friends at the bar downstairs. So this works for them. And Lydia's mother, of course, pretends that she thinks that Lydia is working when she's not home nights, that she's
Right.
staking out somebody or something. And that's what Lydia tells her. And that's what she pretends to believe. She pretends it to Lydia. She pretends it to herself. Eventually, you know, that's what happened with the gay brother, and it happened in a short story, so it doesn't come out so much. But all the brothers and Lydia pretended to Lydia's mother that the brother had a roommate, and Lydia's mother figured it out long before they told her the truth. But since they were all going out of their way to try not to get her upset, she pretended she believed them until finally she had to go to the brother and say, listen, this is ridiculous. You guys are in love, you know, and why shouldn't you get married now that you can? And then I won't have to worry about you. I can worry only about Lydia and Tim. And so now she's pretending she doesn't know that Lydia and Bill are having an overnight.
But one of the, it's a
she'll-
lovely thing in a long running series, you know, to have your characters evolve, their relationships evolve, and they evolve. And I see that we are almost up in an hour. So why don't I call Patrick back and see whether he wants to contribute to this conversation, or if we have questions from any of our audience.
Okay.
This is when the screen changes. Isn't Zoom wonderful? It's like magic.
Hi, Patrick.
Hey, a couple of people watching have noticed some cat sightings in the background.
Oh, you know, I haven't. She was on my lap. Bella, this is Bella the cat, named after Bella Abzug because she's so pushy. And she was on my lap. She went away, and I think she's kind of walking back and forth, but I don't see her. So, but she says hi.
Yeah, let me see. There are some questions here coming in. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you real quick is, you know, when you were discussing, you know, the comparison between or the influence of architecture and that kind of training, it almost seems kind of like, you know, retrofitting a building sometimes, the way you were describing it, you know, discovering some new element later and then sort of putting it back into the structure.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a lot of, when I was practicing, I did a lot of retrofit, a lot of reuse and that kind of thing. So that would not be surprising at all if that were what I was doing.
Yeah. Also, can you talk a little bit about how you deal with the passage of time in the books? I know because China Trade came out in what, 94?
Or
85. Yeah. It's, you know, it's almost 27 years.
Yeah.
Right.
It's been a long time together. We're 32 years old, and Shira's series is 27 years old. So very long time.
Yeah, there are only 3 ways to deal with time in a series. And one is the way Robert Parker did it, is to have Spencer age at the same rate Parker did, to deal in the end as an older detective. Another is to do what Sue Grafton did and have each case a couple of months after the one before. Eventually, the detective doesn't age, but eventually you're writing historicals, which is what happened to her at the end. Or you can do what I've done and what a lot of people do, which is just sort of unhook your detectives from time and have them stay more or less the same. They're each a little older now than they were when I started, but they are moving through a effectively timeless universe. New York has changed, and they, in each book, they are in the changed New York that was then. But I made that decision early on that I would not age them, and I certainly was not willing to write books start, all in the 90s. So that's it's a little bit cheating, but all
you
three
think
ways
of
are
them-
cheating.
Readers prefer it. I certainly am perfectly comfortable with it. You
Yeah.
want the world to move on and the characters not to.
Right. So that's what's
For
happening.
some, I mean, but we just talked about that your characters have evolved.
They've
Not in
evolved.
age so much, but in relationships and so
Yeah,
forth.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So do you think of them kind of like maybe mid 40s, early mid 40s range,
He-
or?
He is
Yeah.
in his early mid 40s.
Gotcha.
She started in her late 20s. I think she's now 30, maybe 31, depending on how old he is, because this is
Right.
gap.
Right.
But
We don't have to examine it closely, right?
no, let's not.
Okay. Our good friend Tori Eldridge,
Hi,
writer.
Tori.
Yeah. She says, or she asks, what comes first for you? Research into an issue, and from there emerges characters and story, or the story first, followed by additional research?
No, it's the research. It's the research. When I decide to set a book in a world, like the real estate Chinatown world, or the Chinese restaurant world, or whatever, I then delve into that world, and whatever comes up in the research, whether it's research talking to people or research reading or just walking around the streets or whatever, whatever comes up works its way into the book. And that's where the plot develops. The characters, some of them develop early on, like this one, the lawyer who inherits the building developed early, and some of the gangsters, although I have to say that one of the gangsters, there's a gangster in this book who's a woman, that was, a light bulb going on, that she did not, that character who started as a man, I suddenly thought, why? Who needs that? And I made that character a woman, and then a whole bunch of stuff developed from that. So the characters kind of develop on their own, but once I know the world fairly well. I do not plot in advance. I have never been able to do that because I don't know the characters, so I don't know what they're about to do. So I just let them go. I try to stay a chapter or two ahead of them. That's the best I can do.
Let's see. Marjorie has a couple of questions. She asks, do you see your Lydia and Bill series continuing indefinitely, or is there a last book in the series in your mind?
There's not. I would like them to continue indefinitely because I have a lot to say about New York, and they are, and everything else, and they are very good spokespeople for what I have to say. I don't have what Agatha Christie had, the last Poirot book in a safe. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, Lydia and Bill are just, gone. I don't have a swan song for them. I would like them to keep going as long as I do.
Good. Yay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's great to see them back too, after a little powder there for a while, a couple of years.
Yeah. Well, but now they're back, and God bless Pegasus Books.
Yeah.
Who really they do a great job there. So
Marjorie also asked, she says, has there been interest in turning the series into a TV show? I think it would be wonderful.
I think it would be wonderful too. I get nibbles, and then they go away. I don't know what is holding, as Groucho Marx said, I don't know what is holding up that teapot. It would be great. I have a very active Hollywood agent now. I changed agents, and she is contacting everybody there is, and we do get interest, but then it fizzles again. I think right now is kind of the age of the Asian actor. I say this having seen Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which I loved, and stars whole bunches of Asian actors, and they're all over the place, so why not? But meanwhile, there's nothing solid. So if anybody out there has, is looking for a TV series to make, get in touch.
Well, long form television is absolutely fabulous for series like yours.
Yeah.
And, if you have enough books in a series that are well regarded, eventually they seem to make it to television. So patience.
Yeah,
is
I'm
probably-
hoping.
Yeah, with all the streaming services there are and so forth, it'll probably work itself out.
Yeah.
Right.
They
Anything else?
need content, I hear. I mean, when you look at how many of them there are, they have to need content.
That's right.
There's some fun comments. Love Lydia's mother, Rachel says. And then Jacqueline says, I love how much I dislike Tim.
I'm kind of with
Yeah.
Jacqueline there, right?
Jacqueline, I'm not sure what your situation is, but I bet you have siblings.
Well, she also asks, who would you cast as Lydia, Bill, and Lydia's mother?
Oh, I don't know. I at one point wanted to cast Awkwafina as Lydia. I was told that was going overboard. So I would cast a young Robert Mitchum as Bill if we could find one. Lydia's mother, I couldn't. I can't even guess who would do that. I know there are older Asian actresses who would be terrific. What is her name? Who was on Hawaii Five-0 until she left. She was great. I would take her in a minute. Although I know she's Korean, but
the original Hawaii Five-0, right?
No. The second one.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And Daniel Day Kim, who was
Great.
also on that show and left. I would cast him not as Tim, because Tim is obnoxious. I would cast him as Andrew in a different book. That casting is
so not Peter Dinklage as Bill, right? No. Lorraine has a good question. She says, will Lydia and Bill come to LA anytime soon?
Oh, if it seems like a good idea. I'm not sure what they would do there, but there's a big there's for her a big Asian community of various types, and for him it's kind of the home of the hard-boiled private eye. Right. So either of them could take the lead in a book set in LA. The next book, which is his, that I'm working on now, is a very New York book. So it might be time to, because the starting from The Art of Violence, that'll be 3 very New York books. So maybe I should take them out of town for the Lydia book after that.
Of course, you've been good about alternating, books. Yeah. One is Lydia's book, and then Bill is the lead in another book, and that's been sort of fun too, because they are different depending on which one of them is running the show.
Yeah, and the next book will be Bill's book,
right?
The New York book I'm working on, and so Lydia would have the one after that. Whether that'll be a Los Angeles book, or I couldn't tell you. I barely have the idea for a next book as I'm finishing the one before it, so I don't know what the next Lydia book would possibly be. But
are there certain stories that you think that's really more of a Lydia story, or this is more of a Bill story?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, there are and it tends to be the family stories, the ones that involve a lot of people who are either related or wish they were, or it's less about, in her case, it's less about money. Although now I say that, and I think about No Colder Place, which had a father-son thing going on. So I could be wrong. But yeah, there are some stories that just present themselves as stories for him and others as stories for her. So, you
Yeah, and
know,
actually the Edgar winner was a Bill story.
yes, it was. That was Winter and Night. Yeah.
Winter and
Mhm.
Night. And Concourse was Bill, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
yeah,
Concourse, isn't that the bricklaying one that I so
No,
love?
that's No Colder Place.
Oh, that's No Colder Place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Concourse is set in the Bronx.
Oh, that's right. Okay. I'm terrible on titles. The older I get, the worse I am with titles. It's really awful. But I mean, all of these books have wonderful personalities, and this is such a terrific series to read your way through. Sure, are the older books available at this point? Are they digital only or?
They are not, but they are about to be.
Oh,
They
good.
have been, I got the rights back from
Yeah.
St. Martin's from my first publisher. But when they gave me the rights back, they took down the digital versions that they had up. So we are making new digital versions of the entire backlist, and we'll be
Wonderful.
putting that up along with some short stories and just all kinds of stuff. So they will be
Okay.
available soon.
Well, I'm
it's
telling you,
nuts that
if
they're
you're a
not.
digital reader, I can't recommend highly enough that you go all the way back and start with China Trade and read your way forward. It's really just a delightful, wonderful series. I love it. I'm hearing the most pitiful puppy noises. You have a
Oh, are
cat.
you?
I have 2 puppies, right? I hear
I-
Scooter crying out there.
Oh, that's so
Whoa.
sad. I'm hearing nothing from the cat, so she's
All right.
probably
Anything else, Patrick, you want to wind us up with?
Sure. And this is something that you probably get asked from time to time. Kathy says, what caused the big time lag between books a couple back? I was so glad when you started writing the series again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. What caused it is I wanted to try something new, and I had an offer from a friend of mine to write with him a series. We did 2 books. That was my paranormals, which I thought were really kind of exciting because I'd never done paranormals. We did 2 books, and then the publisher folded, which I thought was very rude because we had a whole series of books planned that would explain the existence of every paranormal creature on Earth, and to get us as far as vampires and werewolves and then leave. I mean, really. And so then I came back to Lydia and Bill, and it was when I came back to them. Of course, it took me a year to write a book, and another almost year for the publisher to publish it. So that's why it seems like such a long time. But I am working on other things again now besides Lydia and Bill, but I hope that it will be besides them and not instead of them from now on.
I
And
hope so too.
I think it can be. Yeah.
Yeah, because there was a brief lapse after 9/11 too, and sure.
Yes.
A
Yes.
couple of books that were inspired by, or I don't, inspired can't be the right word. Anyway, a result of Shura's reactions as a New Yorker to 9/11.
Right. Right.
And so that was another gap there. But I think you think that writers come back to things re-energized. If you tried something else and then you come back to the familiar, oftentimes you have new energy for it. So it's not a bad
Absolutely.
thing.
That's where Paper Sun came from. Is I'd been away, and I heard this story of the Chinese in Mississippi, and I thought, wow, Lydia. I mean, it just sprang.
Yeah.
That if I didn't write that was such a story for Lydia that if I didn't write it, the world would say, well, I guess you're not interested in Lydia and Bill anymore. We'll go talk to somebody else. So I thought, boy, this is the great stuff. And since then, it's been kind of clear to me what to do next, as is this next Bill book. And after that, I assume I'll get a Lydia book that will somehow fall in my lap, as
Wonderful.
they do. So.
Well, we'll be happy to help you, brainstorm. brainstorm stories, since we're so used
Okay,
to doing
great.
this with you. It'll be absolutely great. I'm full of ideas, and Patrick is too. Family Business is a wonderful book. I just can't recommend it enough. And we do still have some autographed copies. So I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. I want to thank Shira. It's a rare pleasure, as always.
Thank you.
I don't mean rare, a great pleasure. And for any of you who are interested in the Neuro Wolf Awards, stick around. In about 15 minutes. We'll be back with the new winner there, who's on his second book. One of the great things about, having done this for so many years is that we have friends like Shira, where we've been with her for 27 years, but then we have a new guy that's only like, this is the second year. And it's wonderful, just like developing characters, it's wonderful to develop authors as well, which we can't do without all of you. So thank you for joining us. Good night.
Thank you,
Shira,
everybody.
and happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you,
Good
Barbara.
night.
Thank you, Pat.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.